it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. My family experienced a deadly car crash. 8:40 on a Saturday evening. They say that there are some moments in our life that we'll remember for an eternity. Events that we find are branded into our minds, whether we like it or not. You say that we recall these moments down to the minutest detail, and I can attest to that theory quite well. The clear water droplets plummeted from above, splashing into the windshield. Cars travelled alongside the vehicle, their headlights illuminating the rain, and the night sky contained thousands of dazzling stars above. Inhale. My chest rose, my lungs taking in crisp air from the slightly opened window beside me. I turned my head, my eyes meeting with hers, and then falling about her gorgeous teeth and her rose lips. Exhale. My gaze fixated on my rearview mirror, observing my young boy strapped firmly in the back seat, fast asleep. Inhale. My eyes grew wide as the high beams flooded my vision. In an instant, I launched my foot toward the brake, clenching my teeth hard, jaw locked firmly shut. The sound of metal colliding terrorized my ears, and my car's momentum carried us forward. Glass shattered as the vehicle came to a violent halt, causing my body to jerk forward and my face to plant directly into the steering wheel. Two shrieks, one from beside me and one from behind, erupted into the night. They died down as soon as they began, but suddenly there was no sound at all. My body was rendered immobile and my eyesight faded away, yet my lips still functioned. They gently parted, but all I could squeak out was a measly "No," before darkness overwhelmed me. From that point on, I vaguely recall the noisy sound of bustling people and being in a white corridor. Beaming light shone overhead, beckoning for me. I tried reaching out towards it, yet I couldn't move my arms. My eyes fluttered, and I once more drifted away into sleep. I would stay in the hospital for several weeks, recovering from various fractures and undergoing multiple surgeries. My body ached, yet my physical pain could not compare to my worries about my family. Although I felt a relief like no other wash over me when the staff informed me that my son had survived, a familiar sense of dread later overtook me as I learned my wife was in critical condition. Those nights took an eternity to pass. I consistently glanced towards the clock on the wall, observing the hands tick by minute by minute. Tears would claw their way from my eyes at strange hours of the day, drenching my face in moisture until my cheeks burned red. The sweat forming in my palms dampened the bedsheets I clenched. Each time one of the staff or doctors came into my room, my vision darted towards them. I knew they could read my mind. They would give me this pitiful look when they looked into my pleading eyes. Every time I asked, they gave me the same non-answer. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Johnson, we're doing our best to treat your wife." Every day I met with some variation of this response. Yet I persisted, determined to hear that my wife would be okay. Until one day, one of the staff entered my room. Shakily standing up to greet him, I grinned and extended my arm towards his. That's when I noticed a sullen look plastered on his face, and my heart descended below my chest. He spoke calmly, methodically, each word exiting his lips in slow motion. My knees quivered, lightly at first, and then more rapidly as he continued. As they eventually buckled, I collapsed to the floor, my chest furiously heaving, each breath I took growing more exasperated than the last. Several people restrained me and placed me back onto my bed. I think they were trying to give me words of encouragement and sympathy in the process, but whatever they said blended into an incoherent mess. The men and women beside me blurred into unrecognizable forms, and I stared straight ahead. The abhorrently foul stench of perspiration dripping from every orifice of my body dug into my nose and pricked my eyes. My mind, blank as a paper, grew weary, and I finally gave in to the staff attempting to keep me still. The nurses helped clean me up shortly following that outburst. After receiving fresh clothing and being given time and space to come to terms with the news, my nurse escorted me to the lobby. And there he stood, waiting for me. I rushed towards him as quickly as possible. Stooping down, I embraced him, resting my chin on his scalp and gently patting his back. He buried his head into my chest. My shirt moistened, and I held him even closer. He knew. Before we left the hospital, I received a few recommendations from psychiatrists and therapists in my area. After thanking the staff for all their help, my son and I took the bus back to our neighborhood later that night. We had baked chicken with rice that night, but he just sat there, poking his food with his fork. Sighing, I finished my plate, hoping it would inspire him to do the same. Instead, he pushed his food away from him, in front of where an empty chair stood before the table. I knew he wouldn't budge, but I was aware that the hospital had been keeping him healthy and nourished. I told him he should go to bed and get some rest, and he obliged, hopping up from his seat and making his way to his room. After he crawled in bed, I tucked him in and asked if he'd like me to sleep in his room for the night. He shook his head, rejecting my offer. I bent down and kissed his forehead, wishing him a good night. I opened my laptop and researched the therapy centers cited in the pamphlet I'd received earlier. I grimaced when I read the costs for each one. My wife made money along with me for our family. That, combined with the opportunity costs forfeited by my hospital stay, took immediate therapy out of the question. Sighing, I closed the computer and trod over to my bedroom. Placing my palm against the wooden door, I traced my fingers along its perimeter until they met the cold brass knob. Counting down from 5, I forced myself to open the door upon reaching 0. I set foot into the room, flicking the light switch upward. As the bulb cast its light onto dull grey walls surrounding me, I mustered the courage to set foot, one in front of the other. Making my way over to the oak frame of my queen-size bed, I looked down upon the blankets before me. The bed felt so different. It felt so empty. Beside the bed sat a dresser with a picture frame placed atop it. There stood a man and his soulmate, their faces beaming with glee. Feeling the tears trickling down my cheeks, I glanced back toward the bed, realizing I was dampening the sheets while I wept. Breathing in deeply, I turned and exited the room with haste. Retreating to the living room, I lay down on the couch, and after a few hours of tossing and turning, my body finally shut down and let me rest. I didn't recognize where I was. All I knew was that pure light surrounded me, overloading my senses. My mouth opened, yet I still didn't make a sound. I extended my arm, groping ahead of me for whatever surface I could find. And my fingers were met with a wheel. The sound of an engine roared from somewhere within the light. Tires swerved and voices shrieked. Boom. Metal tearing into metal. Incoherent shrill cries produced from the back of the car. Was this truly happening again? My head jerked forward with the momentum of the vehicle. The commotion ceased as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving me in a state of disarray. The cold night air seeped in through the shattered window, erecting the hairs on my arms. And everything was still. It was a dream. I knew it was a dream. So why could I so vividly sense the beads of sweat trickling down my arms and pooling around my knuckles? How is it that a figment of my subconscious mind was able to perfectly replicate the texture of the leather-coated steering wheel which I so desperately clung to? Internally, I knew what would greet me if I were to shift my gaze to my right. Then I felt it. The round object slumped against my shoulder, the messy strands of hair against my arm, the warm, liquid droplets falling and splashing against my hand. I couldn't even form a coherent thought before my attention shifted to the sudden weight pressed against my left shoulder. 5 slender fingers held me in their grip. My head spun around in the opposite direction to observe who was touching me. Upon doing so, my gaze was met with an arm reaching through the shattered window. I tilted my head up, and before me stood a man. He stood tall, adorned with black jeans and a grey dress suit. His frame was much too small for his clothes, though. He appeared fragile. The skin of his arm seemed to loosely stretch over the bone underneath. It was as if he'd disintegrate if even the slightest force were applied to him. Despite the situation around me, my body eased into the seat. I felt a sensation of relief wash over me. He carried an unexplainable aura of familiarity about him. But even despite his malnourished frame, even despite his lanky stature, even despite his face appearing to have been blurred out of existence entirely, I didn't fear him. It almost depressed me that my encounter with him was brief, as I awoke before my eyes scanned what should have been his face. It all happened so fast. I placed my hand on my left shoulder, running my fingertips along its surface. The imprint that would have been left by the man was not there. And of course it wasn't. It was just a nightmare after all. I can't say for certain I understand what I dreamt of that night. It all felt so real. I didn't recognize the man I encountered either, so how could I possibly have felt such an intrinsic connection between him and I? Although I'm not sure what to make of it, I can't help but get the sneaking suspicion that there's more to this than I'm currently comprehending. After all, a dream is said to be a gateway into the subconscious. Whatever the case may be, I'll be sure to keep you guys updated. Well, thank you for listening to what I've had to say up to this point. Part 2. I felt a soft tugging on my beige shirt. The small hand of my boy gripped the polyester tightly. I placed my hand on his head, gently massaging his scalp and pulling him closer to me. The funeral service had occurred just hours prior. Our family wasn't particularly social. We had a few friends and family stop by and offer their condolences to me. It was nice, but if I'm honest, it didn't make me feel better in the slightest. Excuse me for feeling this way, but I wasn't exactly receptive to socializing at my wife's funeral. I only went out of necessity, as well as in pursuit of some form of closure. Well, that closure never did arrive. After it was all said and done, the other attendees left. It was just me and my son, and standing there before her casket all alone. I stepped forward, placing my hand on the wooden box. The casket sat on a platform. Roses and candles were placed near it on a table. It was a lovely setup, yet it didn't feel complete. I knew her body wasn't inside. Her mangled corpse could not be presented for an open casket funeral, so we had planned on having her cremated and having the remains buried. I turned, preparing to leave, but before I could, something peculiar caught my attention. I spun around, eyeing the casket. Had I been hearing things? No, the only ones in the room were my son and I. I turned back to exit the room, only to find my boy had disappeared. Where had he gone? He couldn't have left the room. I hadn't heard any footsteps. Before I could call his name, I heard it again. Boom! I most definitely had not been imagining things. Sean, where are you, buddy? I called out, now aware of the anxiety bubbling within me. I heard no answer. Rather, the only thing I heard was a faint laugh coming from behind me near the casket. I recognized that laugh, and my breath got caught in my throat. I spun around, facing the source of the noise. And there she stood, her angelic presence seemingly illuminating the room. What the fuck? I uttered, staring ahead in disbelief. It was impossible. I have to be hallucinating, I muttered. Had I gone mad? I'd been so wrapped up in my thoughts that I hadn't immediately noticed myself moving towards her. I extended my arms, resting them on her shoulders. Her red freckles adorned her face, having just enough opacity to be noticeable. She smiled, revealing her pearly white palate, whereupon her dimples appeared. It was her. She was standing before me in the flesh. I wanted so desperately to speak, but I could only choke on my own words. She delicately placed her hand on me, the cold, smooth surface of her ring grazing my cheek. Lowering my arms to her waist, I held her against me. When gazing into her eyes, the rest of the world simply ceased to be. All that existed was her and I at that place at that time. Gently we swayed back and forth, like the leaves of a tree on a gusty autumn day. Rocking forward and backward, we held each other in our arms. Her skin was warm, and I became entrapped in her aura. My muscles relaxed, and soon enough I was no longer conscious of our movements. My body went on autopilot as we danced to the beat of our hearts, conjoined as one. I was in heaven, for my love was alive again. I closed my eyes, smiling in contentedness. I heard a wet splash, and at the same time liquid pooled into my hand. Its warmth juxtaposed the suddenly cold surface I felt pressed against me. My eyes sprung open. The once lively eyes of Elizabeth were now sunken and dull. Her appearance was now ghoulish, and her skin appeared to stick closely to her bones. Looking down at my hands, I saw that they'd been covered with blood. A large laceration covered the surface of her stomach, and the stench of charred flesh infiltrated my nostrils. I shoved her away from me and collapsed to the floor. I only had a split second to process what had happened before thick chunks of vomit erupted from my throat. God, I wish I hadn't met her gaze again. Her sweet smile had transformed into a sickening grin. She dragged herself towards me, leaving a streak of blood and pus in her path. I attempted to get up and stumble away from her, but to no avail. I felt nauseous and struggled to do anything besides clumsily shuffling away. I grimaced in pain as I felt her latch onto my arm, digging her yellowish, rotten nails into my skin. She used her momentum to lunge at me, shoving me to the ground and landing on top of me. I screamed and I fought and I clawed at her, desperate to get her off me. Well, somehow, even though her body appeared rotten and broken, she overpowered me, scraping and clawing at my flesh. And then I felt a tug on my beige shirt. A tiny hand gripped the polyester fabric. I picked myself up from the floor and looked down at my son. He looked back up at me, a look of concern and fear on his face. A puddle of vomit and tears occupied the floor beside where I collapsed. God, did I imagine everything? No, I quickly realized that wasn't the most important question at that time. I mean, had my boy witnessed what had just happened? How could I have allowed myself to appear so weak in front of him? A boy is meant to see his father as a superhero, a strong man who can persevere through anything. Not only had that person collapsed in the hospital, but it collapsed here as well. God, what would he think of me? Regret and dismay ran through my veins at that moment, but those feelings were interrupted as Sean embraced me with as much strength as his little arms could muster. I froze, and then gently reciprocated his embrace. He had seen me collapse, seen me cry, seen me at my most vulnerable. Yet when I looked upon my son, comforting me when I needed it the most, I didn't see a child who felt disappointed in his father. All I saw was an act of compassion. Not wanting to weep more than I already had, I let go of Sean and stood upright. He was only a child and had already suffered the loss of his mother. At such a young age, I doubted that he had much understanding of the concept of death at all. But I knew for certain he missed Elizabeth, and so I knew I had to be there for him. I promised then and there that I would be strong for Sean. We arrived home that evening. I treated Sean to the best pot roast I could make, and was ecstatic to see he'd finally regained his appetite. I tucked him to bed soon after, and brought a chair by his bed, pulling his sheets and covers over him. The lamp by his bedside shone brightly. "Hey, doing okay, little guy?" I inquired. He didn't respond, of course. He hadn't uttered as much as a word since the incident. I didn't understand why, but I didn't want to press him on it either. I'd get some help as soon as I could. I grabbed his stuffed teddy bear from a nearby shelf and waved it in front of him. "Hey, you remember how we got this? You know how we went to the fair last year, and you played the baseball game and won Teddy?" I'd hoped bringing up this memory would elicit a response from Sean, but he simply smiled and continued to look at me. Sighing, I returned his smile and patted his head. When Mummy and I got married, we knew we wanted a baby. And every night we would pray to the angels that a baby boy would come. And one day you came to us. It was the happiest day of our lives, Sean. And from that point forward, you made us the happiest parents around. Mom won't be around for a long time, but I promise that she is watching you with the angels. And she's smiling, Sean. She's so proud of her beautiful baby boy. So am I. We'll always love you. Again, Sean's lips never parted once. Yet I knew he understood. He had to have understood. We just had to. I just wanted to hear his voice again. "Good night, Sean," I said, getting up to leave his room. Before I could, he reached out and grabbed my arm. "All right, sorry, buddy," I said, leaning over and kissing his forehead. He nodded his head in satisfaction and laid down. I turned off his lamp and closed the bedroom door. Making my way to the bathroom, I went inside and stared into the mirror. I kept my promise to myself to stay strong for Sean, at least for tonight. I gripped the sink tightly, leaning over and peering into my reflection. What the hell had happened earlier? Could it have been related to the dream I had the other night? Why was I experiencing these disturbing visions? I'd never really had to deal with mental trauma in the past, so I was unfamiliar with how the process would work, how to process this information. If people knew about the experiences I was having, would they think I was crazy? For the first time in my life, I felt small, out of control. I balled my hand into a fist, pounding it into the wall. That night was a sleepless one. All I could do was look up at the ceiling. Empty thoughts occupied my mind. I couldn't make sense of what I'd experienced, so I merely dismissed them as nightmares. I'll keep you guys updated on any future developments. I think I need an outlet to get my thoughts out. I don't want to vent to my son, so I'll list my thoughts here. Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. Part 3. Found it hard to eat recently. Besides the pork roast I had with Sean, I haven't had much of an appetite for anything. I've lost quite a bit of weight, evident by my rapidly thinning frame. I haven't been sleeping well either. Despite this, I've been giving my best efforts to stay strong. I truly believe Sean and I will get through this. When Sean fell asleep during the evening, I decided for the first time in a while to try driving again. I've been walking or using public transport to get from place to place, but I knew that I couldn't just avoid driving forever. We'd taken Liz's car that night, so I was able to use mine. I went out to the driveway and entered my vehicle. I put the keys into the ignition, slowly turning it until I could hear the hum of the engine. Taking a deep breath, I shifted the gear into reverse and backed out of the driveway. Deciding I'd get off to a slow start, I drove through my neighborhood streets at a low speed. The car methodically made its way down the road, and I eased up a little. I was getting comfortable driving again. Mustering up a little more courage, I turned onto a public road so I could practice driving among other vehicles again. My hand started to tremble, so I gripped the wheel tightly. I turned on my hazard lights. I needed to pace myself and keep my cool. I applied a little more pressure on the accelerator. My body stiffened as the car picked up speed, and I responded by slowing my breathing. Doing so allowed me to loosen my body and I pressed down on the accelerator even harder. I lowered the windows and felt the wind blow against my face. Horns beeped all around me. The noise of chattering pedestrians and restaurant music was omnipresent. I remembered the feeling of driving down the road at night in my car, the way the breeze flowed through my hair, and the way the paved roads felt underneath my tires. As I looked into my rearview mirror, I almost thought my eyes were betraying me. I was smiling. Not just a smirk, but a full-on grin. I released my grip on the wheel and simply drove. For miles I travelled, not having a care in the world. Oh, how I missed cruising along towards the horizon. That liberating feeling coated me in pure bliss. As darkness enveloped the environment, I flicked on my headlights. Peering into the night sky, I saw millions of stars sparkling above. Momentarily pausing to appreciate the serene view, my attention was drawn to an alternative source of light ahead of me. The headlights of another vehicle rapidly approached. Well, I defaulted back to clutching the wheel. Those lights, they flooded my vision just as memories flooded in my mind. Remembering to be calm, I once more inhaled a surplus of oxygen, letting it stir in my stomach before a prolonged exhale exited my nose. For a moment, the light covered my entire vehicle. Then, in a split second, it was over. I observed my rearview mirror once more, watching the car travel down the road behind me. Pulling onto the shoulder, I put the car into park and leaned back into the seat. I let out an audible sigh of relief, followed by a single sentence. I did it. Returning home later that night, I quietly entered my house and went to check on Sean. His door opened with a slight creak, and I made my way over to his bedside. I turned on his lamp, only to find the covers of an empty bed pulled to the side. Confused, I exited his room and called out his name. There was no response. The door had been locked when I arrived, so I knew he had to be in the house. I checked the kitchen and the dining room before making my way to the hallway. The walls were coated in a darkness as black as tar, except for the very end of the hall. There stood the door to my bedroom, the glow of light outlining its perimeter. I approached it, placing my hand on the doorknob and entering my room. There sat my son on my bed. In his arms sat a picture frame that held the image of Elizabeth standing by Sean. He stared at the image, his face as still as stone. I went over to him, sitting by his side and placing my arm over his shoulder. I noticed dark splotches from the picture frame. Placing my hand under Sean's chin, I lifted his head to face me. Red circles surrounded his watery eyes. Using my thumb to wipe the remaining tears from his cheek, I tried to offer him the best smile I could, but his frown remained. There I sat, at a loss for words. My gaze lowered and focused on the picture in the frame. Placing my hand on his, we sat in silence and viewed the photo together. Eventually I broke the silence, realizing just how late it was. Hey buddy, let's head to bed, okay? Sean gave me a head nod and arose, traversing the corridors of the house to his room. I tucked him in, as per usual, before retreating to my bed. I then picked up the picture frame and held it in my hand. Elizabeth was as beautiful as ever, and for the first time in ages, viewing her did not cause me distress or pain. Rather, I felt a sense of acceptance. I recalled what I'd told Sean, about her watching over him with the rest of the angels. Well, I'd said it to ease his mind. I too had begun to tell myself the same thing, that somewhere out there in the universe my Liz was watching, hoping for the best for me. I glanced at the image of Sean, standing by his mother. He had the purest grin on his face, one that could melt my heart 1,000 times over. I knew he did because I remembered taking that photo. Yet that wasn't how he appeared now. No, in his place stood a different Sean, A Sean without the grin, without the energetic and hopeful eyes. Rather one with deep gashes and bruises embedded into his flesh. One whose limbs appeared contorted into unnatural positions. In the blink of an eye, his happy demeanour changed into one of shock and terror. Taken aback, I dropped the photo and rushed back to Sean's room. I burst through the door, only to find him peacefully asleep in his bed. He was there, alive, in one piece. I saw him with my own 2 eyes. Making my way back into my bedroom, I scooped up the picture frame and gazed upon it once more. Well, there he stood, looking perfectly happy. Rubbing my eyes in hopes to clear my vision, I viewed the image again, hoping to confirm that what I saw was real. The photo remained unchanged, still showing Sean as the gleeful little boy I knew him to be. I put the photo away and climbed into bed, pulling the covers over my body. Sinking my head into my pillow, I closed my eyes. Although it took a few hours, I eventually drifted into a deep slumber. The following day, I woke up early. Entering the kitchen for a glass of water, the sound of footsteps caught my attention. They were heading down the hallway, which leads to Sean's room. Figuring Sean had woken up, I followed them down the hallway. I saw his bedroom door ajar. Inside, I found my boy sitting beside the being from my dream all those nights ago. There he was in his slick grey suit. He appeared as malnourished as ever, his thin frame giving him a feeble look. His face remained blurred, so much so that I couldn't discern any of his features. I watched as he extended his bony fingers towards my son, laying them atop his head. He brushed Sean's hair with his hand. Neither one of them faced me, and despite the circumstances, I didn't feel fear for my safety or Sean's. I walked toward the creature, attempting to touch it. Mere centimeters before the tips of my fingers grazed its figure, my body lunged forward, my forehead drenched in sweat. I observed my surroundings, realizing I'd not yet left my bed. I decided to put the picture frame away in my closet for the time being. The thing freaks me out, and after that dream and what I would assume was my hallucination yesterday, I just can't bear to view it. Once again, I'll be sure to keep you all updated. Look, I can't express my gratitude enough to you all. Truly. Thank you. Part 4. Sean, I need you to speak to me. I must have uttered several variations of that phrase for at least half an hour. Please, buddy, you can talk to me, okay? I promise you can talk to Papa. No matter how many times I repeated those words to him, he simply wouldn't answer. I desperately needed to know that he could speak. I needed to know that he was real. The truth is, the constant barrage of delusions had taken a toll on my psyche. Distinguishing between what was real and what was merely a figment of my imagination had become difficult. I had to know Sean was real. I wanted to believe he was, and I would know if he was real if he could just speak. Could he not see the anguish in my eyes? Why wouldn't he utter just a single word? I gripped his shoulders tightly, begging him to even part his lips once. He never obliged my only wish. No amount of bribery or pleading could elicit a response from him. All he did was grab my arm, turn towards his room, and then march towards it. As I followed him, an overbearing sense of dread began to brew within me. I felt my heart intensely pounding in my throat as we entered the room together. There, the entity sat. My head hung low as Sean released me from his grasp and trekked towards the being ahead. I too approached it, once again attempting to touch this thing. Preparing to suddenly awake from what I'd assumed was another nightmare, I placed my hand on the figure. Only I didn't wake in my bedroom once again. Instead, it too placed its hand on me, and we felt each other's papery frames. Slowly but surely, the details of the being's face were revealed to me. As I looked upon it, I recognized its features, for they were my features too. I stumbled backward, watching as the thing with my appearance leaned towards my son, gently kissing his forehead. I ogled the creature, swallowing the oceans of saliva that built up in my mouth in a single, swift gulp. The creature locked eyes with me, and I locked eyes with it. As this occurred, a sense of familiarity washed over me. My mind darted back and forth, unsure of what to make of the situation. That is, until my thoughts inexplicably settled on the memory of the accident on that fateful night. I recalled the blinding lights, the shrill cries of fear and suffering. But no, there was more. The overhead traffic light, from which a soft red hue shone in the night sky. My vehicle had passed underneath the light, and then the impact happened. The doctors... had they truly told me my son had survived? Yeah, they say that there are some moments in your life that you'll remember for an eternity. There was a quote that I wrote back towards the beginning of this. So then, why couldn't I recall the words of the doctor who told me that Sean was still alive? Could I truly have forgotten? I snapped back to reality, keeping eye contact with the being before me. Only now, Sean was nowhere to be found. The sense of familiarity I felt soon dissipated and was replaced with boiling hatred. I glared at the monster, my palms balling up. I rushed towards it, tackling it to the ground. And before it could react, I began pummeling it with my fists. You're the reason Elizabeth is gone. You're the reason Sean's gone. Now I'm going to kill you, I exclaimed, gritting my teeth and continuing my assault on the being. It showed no resistance. It simply allowed me to keep striking it, again and again, and again, and again, and again. I had no plans on stopping. Blood flowed from the thing's face and onto my fists. With every strike, I could feel my body breaking. With every blow, I could sense the light within me begin to extinguish. Yet I carried on, ignoring the growing pain within me. I was going to kill this man for taking what I'd held dearest to me. At that point, I couldn't even see the thing. Tears clouded my eyes, blurring my sight. I simply pounded my fists downward, hoping to murder the figure in my fit of rage. I felt a soft tugging on my beige shirt. It was gentle, yet enough to pause my assault. A tiny hand gripped the polyester fabric. My arms fell to my side. I turned my head, and there he was. My boy stood by my side. I froze, my eyes widening like saucers as I witnessed his lips parting for the very first time. I forgive you, Papa. He smiled at me and embraced me once more. I embraced him too, feeling the streams of tears begin to erupt from my eyes. Not wishing to get my tears on his shoulder, I closed my eyes. I soon found that a second pair of arms had wrapped around me. The smooth surface of a ring pressed against my skin. I didn't let go for what felt like hours, but I knew I couldn't hold on forever. As I opened my eyes, I found myself alone with the figure in what was once Sean's room. I stood up and approached him once more. In one swift motion, I hugged the thing, pulling it close against me. When I let go, the thing vanished from my view. It was over. I fetched the picture frame from the closet and placed it back on my bedside. There stood Sean and Liz, standing beside each other with their grins on their faces. In the reflection of the frame, I could see my face beside theirs. I smiled with them for one final time. I know Sean and Elizabeth and the angels are looking from somewhere out there, wishing the best for me. I know they would want me to forgive myself, though doing so isn't going to be easy. I do think I'll manage to do it. They may not be with me on this earth, but I know that they're with me in my heart and mind. Well, thank you all for listening. I think I'm going to be okay from this point forward. Don't expect any more updates from me. I have the feeling that I should move on. Well, it was a pleasure. Well, my dear friends, bit of a tearjerker in the end, that one. Hope that didn't hit home too hard for any of you listening to this. Got a feeling it might have done, but, well, it was a good story, well worth telling. Well, I am kind of on a break, but I brought all my equipment with me to the north of France, where I'm staying in this log cabin in the middle of nowhere. I'll be sharing some images and maybe some videos of that with you pretty soon as well. Just away for a while to recharge the batteries and think things through. But I don't know, was in the mood for telling a story, so why not while I was here? Oh, thank you, my dear friends. Podcast going on as normal. Stories coming again soon. Not sure of the schedule yet, but like I said, I do need a bit of a break from everything, and it seems to be working so far. Okay, till the next time, whenever that is, my dear friends, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.